Convention of State supporters. My name is Whitney Taylor. I'm here with Andrew Rudolph, my wonderful partner in crime. We are very excited to talk to you all about some amazing things in this episode. Andrew, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic, Whitney. I'm happy that the weather where I'm at is starting to cool off. It's not in the triple digits anymore, so I'm thankful for that, and I'm even more thankful to be here with you. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm also feeling the same way. It's very exciting. Whenever it reaches below 100, everybody gets out their fall garb and everybody's wearing layers again. It is fantastic. So I'm very
Pumpkin
excited.
spice lattes.
Exactly. Yeah, helping to get in the fall spirit of things, right? You have to make your own fall time when you live in the desert, as you know. I'm very excited about today's episode. We're going to be talking about beating the IRS. You'd think that it'd be impossible to win anything with America's most hated government agency, but with our guest, he has some experience doing that. So we're going to be talking to him about what he does within Convention of States, and I'm really, really excited about that interview. Of course, we have our Ask Us Anything segment at the end of our segment, so definitely ask us some of your hardest hitting questions, and me and Andrew will try our best to answer them to the best of our ability. But of course, we have our Article 5 trivia question with Mike Ruthenberg. So Mike, take it away.
Hello, Whitney, and hello, Andrew. I'm glad to be joining the show today, and I'm more excited for you guys because you guys get to hear from Robert Kelly, our general counsel, an absolutely brilliant man who will make things so easy to understand. He's so compelling. He's so authoritative. I'm really excited for you guys. You're going to be able to see what's going on with Convention of States. He's the one that keeps us legal, keeps us on point, and makes sure that we prevail whenever we need to. And as you probably will find out, there's some wonderful surprises you'll learn about Robert as we go along. But in the meantime, it is time for our trivia for the day. And this should be relatively easy. I expect a whole lot of you guys will have very busy fingers as you are tapping on the keyboard the answer to our trivia question today. And of course, the reason we do this is because we want you to be active. And the more people that are posting on our Facebook page, the more people will actually get to see the feed. So you will be doing your job to help get the word out on Convention of States, the latest information, just like you're here every Tuesday when you join us on this Facebook Live. Our prize for today is the coveted COS hat. And we will be ordering you one of those from the COS store. If you don't win, you can go there yourself and order your own hat, which is conventionofstates.com/store. Get your hat and wear it around. People ask you what's going on, and I can't even begin to tell you how many people are interested in what we're doing. The interest in the Constitution is blossoming, and it'll be very easy to strike up conversations so we can save this nation. So here's our question for the day. And for many of you that are listening, it's going to be super easy. So get your fingers going, warm them up a little bit. And let's see if you know the answer to our question, which is, what are the 3 subjects or planks in the COS resolution? That's our question. What are the 3 subjects or planks in the COS resolution to bring in Article 5 Convention of States? And the reason why we have planks is because in order for this to work, we need to put boundaries on it. And that way people will understand what it takes or what is germane and what's not germane to our application. It provides for safety and clarity, and it's unprecedented. It's never been done like this. The only Article 5 convention proposals have been single subject. We now have 3 of them. So if you can get that, type it in there. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of the show, and I'll see you at the end.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. That is a great question. I hope to see a lot of people submitting their answers to that question, because that's one of the main things about Convention of States, those 3 pillars of the resolution and what we stand for. So definitely answer that question, and hopefully you'll be able to win that prize. And without further ado, I am very excited to be welcoming Robert Kelly, who is on the General Counsel for Convention of States. Not only does he help us stay operational behind the scenes, he does so much, so just having some of his time is a blessing. But he has testified for the COS resolution before committees in several states. and is among the premier nonprofit attorneys in America. So, Robert, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you are so busy this time of year specifically, so thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, Whitney. I am glad to see that you did not introduce me as your partner in crime, like you introduced Andrew. So,
yeah, I could have done that. I could have, because you've helped me with a lot of things.
Please don't.
Right. All right. So give us a little bit of an overview of your life. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? How did you get connected with Convention of States in the first place?
Sure. So I'm a Southern California native, not unlike Andrew, and I've lived here my entire life. So like you guys, I'm enjoying a little bit of cooler weather here, which I mean 80 degrees instead of 90 degrees. And again, growing up here my entire life, I got involved with COS right at the very beginning. I was coming out of law school looking for an opportunity to get involved in a cause that I believed in, that I supported. And I just so happened to be in touch with Mike Ferris, who was the chancellor of Patrick Henry College, where I went to undergrad. And he was starting up Convention of States right at that time and was looking for a young, affordable attorney that he could bring on board for the organization. So shortest, easiest job interview I ever had. Talked to Mike for about 5 minutes. He sold me on Convention of States right off the bat. And next thing I knew, I was flying out to Virginia to be one of the first 4 members of the Convention of States staff.
I mean, that's just so awesome that you've been with Convention of States since the very beginning. So because you've been with Convention of States since the start, do you have any fun or entertaining stories in the early days of the organization? Maybe something that's not going to get us in too much trouble if you share?
Well, the early days were very much the Wild West. There were 4 of us in an office. We had no clue if this was going to go anywhere, if this was going to do anything. It sounded like a great idea, but you just never know, how this is going to get publicity, how this is going to spread. And, for all of us, we were just kind of, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, still trying to figure out where we were in our careers, what we were doing with our lives. And there were just a ton of, it was a wonderful and a crazy time. I still remember our staff meetings where we'd all come in early in the morning and we'd have Mike Ferris in there and he would just start telling jokes to start us off on the day, make sure we were all upbeat, make sure we were all on the same page to be ready to dive in on this. And then I remember as soon as Mark Levin's Liberty Amendments came out, that just unleashed the floodgates. And all of a sudden we had hundreds of applications for positions, volunteer positions that we had listed on our website, but we didn't have job descriptions for. We just had the title because we knew we needed people in the states to run the states and to get their programs going. And so I remember some of those early people, many of whom are on staff right now, like Dave Schneider, some former staff members as well, Tamara Colbert, and a number of other people who signed up right off the bat. And they're like, well, what do we do? And we're like, we don't know. Make it up. Figure out what you're going to do. And and thankfully we've come a little bit of a way since then. We've learned from their experience, and we've grown quite a bit since then.
Wow, that's crazy. I love to learn about that because we've definitely come a long way. That's so awesome. And then the whole reason we want to have a Convention of States is to empower the American people by reducing the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. So I just gave away one of the trivia questions, but that includes the IRS. And the IRS has become so powerful. It's created this massive industry of accountants and attorneys just so that organizations and businesses can comply with government regulations. So my question to you, Robert, is are you basically working to put yourself out of a job by working for Convention of States?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I'm in the very awkward position of doing exactly that. So my primary role is to do regulatory compliance for us here at Convention of States, which means filing all that lovely paperwork with the IRS, with other government regulatory bodies, and at the same time, trying to get amendments passed to shut down a lot of those regulatory bodies so that businesses don't have to have people like me on staff who try and interpret all these arcane laws and rules and regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I mean, well, that's just a bummer that you might be putting yourself out of business, but it's for a noble cause. And,
that's what I tell myself, Andrew. That's what makes it worthwhile. I'll tell you what, if it was just filing paperwork, I'd have a hard time living with myself. But the fact that I'm doing it for a cause I believe in really helps.
Absolutely. And, since we're on this topic of the IRS, I mean, most people go up against the IRS and they do not come out the other end successful because it's a huge organization with all those lawyers that you were talking about. And it just can be, really crushing, a crushing experience. But the same can't be said for you because you helped lead a fight against the IRS with the Convention of States Foundation, and you actually won. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that experience you had going up against the IRS?
Sure, yeah. So starting back about 7 years ago now, some of you may remember this, the IRS targeted a bunch of Tea Party organizations that were seeking to get 501c3 and in some cases 501c4 nonprofit status. And that's a really big deal because that exempts you from having to pay income tax for those types of organizations. And the IRS basically sent out a whole bunch of questionnaires asking all sorts of inappropriate questions, who these people had worked with in the past, their donor lists, all kinds of information that wasn't relevant to making a determination about whether they were exempt from income tax. And so Convention of States Foundation found a lot of these Tea Party groups and helped them get set up with a group of attorneys to help litigate for them and overcome the IRS opposition to them getting tax exempt status. And ultimately, thankfully, by God's grace, we were able to prevail in that litigation. We came out, got a several $1 million settlement for the IRS, and ultimately an apology from the Department of Justice for the way that they had treated these organizations. And the real tragedy of this whole thing was that these groups were targeted specifically because they had patriotic words in their names. They had words like Tea Party, 9/11 Group. They had different patriotic names associated with them. And that caused the IRS to set them aside for special treatment. It wasn't because they were doing stuff that was inappropriate for 501c4 or 501c3 nonprofits. It was because they were liberty-minded groups that were trying to promote ideals that the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. didn't like.
Dang, what a fight. I absolutely love to hear about that. That kind of fires me up. I love it. It kind of proves that we have the legal chops to go head-to-head with the federal government and win, which is so, so awesome. Do you foresee the IRS and other federal agencies kind of putting the target on our backs as we get closer and closer to calling an actual convention?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the sad part is it really depends tremendously what administration is in Washington. And every administration tries to use the bureaucracies that exist there to shut down speech that they don't like, speech that opposes their particular ideological view. So we struggled tremendously. The Department of Justice was very aggressive in prosecuting that lawsuit against the Tea Party groups. In fact, at one point, the judge even said that the Department of Justice wasn't doing justice because they were trying to drag out every aspect of this litigation to try and dry up all the funding so that they would just win by default. And then when the administration shifted, all of a sudden, a lot of that opposition faded to the background. The DOJ still pursued the case, but didn't do so nearly as vigorously. And that's just a real tragedy is as we see more and more of these laws that get implemented, and we've seen this a lot with all of the COVID regulations as well, the more and more we see these laws proliferate and the more and more laws there are, the easier and easier it is for the government to use seemingly neutral laws to go after people they don't like, right? I mean, I think we all sort of know in the back of our heads, like it's really impossible to comply with the Internal Revenue Code. Even the IRS doesn't really know how to comply with the Internal Revenue Code because it's just so massive and so complicated. And the problem with that is if the government wants to come after you, they can. So if they don't like the speech you're doing, they use those laws, they use all the nuances and all the ambiguities and all the different ways that those laws, that you may be in violation of those laws to come after you and try and shut you down. And even if there isn't a violation, just the mere fact that they might be able to make an argument allows them to prolong the case, run you out of money, and essentially just create this wall of opposition you can't get past. And that's what we're trying to reduce. That's what we're trying to undo with Convention of States. We're trying to get rid of so many of those laws that, while perhaps well-intentioned in some cases, just provide the government an excuse to persecute individuals who they disagree with.
Yeah, it's so sad hearing just how crippling the IRS can be. And I mean, we're just so thankful that we have someone like you who has the ability to wade through all of these laws and all of these different codes and whatnot. But not only did you go up against the IRS, you've also gone around the country and you've gone to various state legislatures on behalf of Convention of States, and you've testified before various committees. For example, we have a short clip of one of your testimonies where you were in front of the Wisconsin Senate Committee on behalf of Convention of States. Here's this clip right here.
First and most fundamentally, this piece of legislation is not about a particular policy position. This legislation is not about Republican or Democrat. This legislation is not about conservative or liberal. What this legislation is about is a much more fundamental question than what is our policy. It's about the question of who decides what that policy should be. And our founders would have said that was really the ultimate question. And according to our Constitution, it is we the people who decide. And in order to secure that, in order to secure the rights of the people, the founders divided power within our government. First, they divided it between the branches of the federal government, the judiciary, the legislative, and executive branches, such that each of those branches would have an incentive to take power away from the rest, so that each of those branches would check the others. In James Madison's words, such that ambition would counteract ambition. And according to James Madison, it's that checks and balances system that secures our rights. Bills of rights are parchment barriers ultimately. Venezuela has a phenomenal Bill of Rights. It has a constitution that's over 50 pages long that guarantees you every right under the sun. And yet none of that means anything without the meaningful, substantive checks and balances in the system. And that's exactly what this legislation is about.
So in that clip, like I said before, you are testifying in front of the Wisconsin Senate committee, and you're testifying on behalf of Convention of States for the COS resolution. But you also brought up the idea of checks and balances and the necessity that they play within our system of government. It's interesting because right now we're about to go into an election, and people right now are so focused on who they are going to elect into the system, but they're not really thinking too much about the structure of the system. But the founders, they were very concerned with how the system was structured. So would you be able to expand on why a convention of states is necessary to fix the system of government that we have right now and how it has gone away from what the founders originally envisioned? And would you also be able to expand on why we can't elect the right people into office to cure the runaway debt or the bureaucracy or the overreaching that we are seeing within the court system?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it was James Madison who said, if men were angels, no government would be needed, right? So if we had perfect rulers, none of this would be necessary. But the reality is that's not human nature. Human nature is fallen. Human nature is corrupt. And we need to have a system of government that can function even when there aren't the rulers that we like, or even in some cases, good rulers who are going to exercise restraints on their own power. We need to have a system that functions even when we have bad rulers who want to accumulate more power, and rulers who began as good rulers but ultimately got corrupted by the system around them. And so the way you do that has to be structural. And you can see that we have a structural problem just by how ugly this election cycle has gotten. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing, the kind of things that are getting thrown around and how much people are at each other's throats over this presidential election. It shouldn't matter that much who the president is. Congress is elected to pass laws, not the president. And yet, through executive orders, through continuing expansion of executive authority, the president has become a much more important figure. Those checks and balances aren't functioning the way they were originally intended to. You can see the same thing with the Supreme Court, right? Think about the last two fights over justices who have been nominated to the Supreme Court. Think about the circus that was the Brett Kavanaugh nomination, right? It should not matter that much who is on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is just there to interpret the laws, to apply them neutrally. And yet it matters tremendously the ideology of the people that we put on the Supreme Court. That should not be under our structure of government. And what that tells us is not that we have a personnel problem, but that we have a structural problem with our government. We need to restore federalism. That's what it comes down to. Checks and balances were designed to exist not only horizontally, as I described in that video, between the branches of the federal government, but more importantly, they were designed to exist vertically between the federal government and the state governments. And for the last 100 years, the states have exercised no meaningful check on the federal government. And the result of that is exactly what you'd expect, right? If Congress never vetoed, if the president never vetoed an act of Congress, how do you think the balance of power would look between Congress and the president, right? Congress would get immense power. Well, that's exactly what we have happening between the states and the federal government. The states have never exercised their constitutional authority, certainly not in the last 100 years, to push back against the federal government. And we have exactly what we should expect under that scenario. We have a federal government that's too large and that tries to do too much.
Amen. That's awesome. So Convention of States is all about fixing the damage that has been done by the courts and career politicians and just deep state bureaucrats. But we need to find a long-term solution to restore America back to what it used to be. And Convention of States is all about finding that and implementing Article 5 of the Constitution to make that happen. But since most of state legislatures are done for the year, COS is only able to really focus on the elections that are happening right now. And I kind of want to hear a little bit about your perspective on the new thing that we have going on, which is the Get Out the Vote efforts that Convention of States Foundation and COS Action are doing. And can you explain why that's really important right now?
Yeah, elections are the starting point for democracy. Elections are not going to save this country, but elections are absolutely foundational to turning this country around. If people will not even take the most basic step of exercising their God-given right to elect their government in this country, then this country is doomed. That's the bottom line, right? It was Sir Edmund Burke who said, all that is required for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing, right? All that is required for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And I think we've gotten complacent in our country. For a long time, things were good. We had a good system economically. Maybe we didn't always agree with the policies on the other side, but the country continued to go in the right direction on the whole, and we got complacent. We don't get engaged in elections the way we should. You think back to like the Lincoln Douglas debates, right? People would sit for hours, sometimes 3-4 hours, listening to complex arguments over human nature and the role of government. And we just sit there for that long in like heat without air conditioning in stuffy buildings in immense humidity. Like now we can't even listen to a 30-second TV spot for a presidential candidate without turning our attention away. It's really sad how little the American people are engaged in the election process right now. And what we need to do is we need to encourage people to get re-engaged in the process. A big part of that is encouraging people to get out and vote. Learn about the candidates in your area, learn about the issues in your area, and get out there and exercise your God-given right to vote in this country.
Absolutely. And do you think that, just to kind of follow up, do you think that this really, Get Out the Vote, does it fit within the COS mission?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The overarching goal of what Convention of States is about is restoring a culture of self-governance in America. And that requires that people be willing to govern themselves, that people be willing to sacrifice maybe the thing they want to do in order to do the thing they should do. And it's really easy right now to feel hopeless in the context of elections. Like, it doesn't really matter who we elect. 4 more years, somebody's going to be telling us this is the most important election of our lives, right? 4 years after that, it'll be the same story all over again. And it can be very easy to feel disempowered in that process. And that's why the Article 5 component of what we're doing is so important. We need to have an immediate solution, which is getting involved in your local elections, wherever you're at. But we also need to have a longer term solution to change the structure of our country, to restore principles of federalism so that this doesn't end up being the case for forever, where every election becomes even more important than the one before it. And it becomes even more about the personalities who are there running for office. We need to have a system where it is actually a rule of law and not a rule of men. But in the meantime, we also need to do our diligence. We need to govern ourselves. We need to make the sacrifices necessary in order to be good citizens of this country. And that means learning about your candidates and getting out there on election day and voting.
Absolutely. And now, before we let you go, I want to get your opinion on what's going to happen on Thursday night. We have another presidential debate happening. I know you're very excited to talk about this. But I just was wondering what you thought about the new rule that they're implementing, which is whoever's speaking will have full mic, but whoever's not speaking will be muted during the debate. Do you think that will hurt either Biden or Trump specifically? And what are kind of your predictions for how the debate's going to go?
I think it has the potential to hurt Trump more. I mean, he's certainly the more bombastic of the two candidates in this election. Honestly, I feel sorry for the moderator. No matter what happens there, the accusation is going to be partisanship on that side of things. So I honestly don't think this is going to shape that. The mute button is going to change things all that much. I don't think it'll probably throw Trump off his game too much. He's too steady in what he wants to do. He's already kind of an off-kilter person to begin with, so I don't think he'll actually get thrown off that much by it. I don't think the moderator will use the mute button all that much, but we'll see. I think it has the potential to be a very interesting debate.
I completely agree with you. It's definitely going to be interesting. Whatever happens, you can't count out that it's going to be interesting. So I got one last question before we let you go. It's about the younger generation. So the younger generation, unfortunately, has not been viewed in a favorable opinion by the older generation, unfortunately. That's partly due, I'm sure, because of media and because of news, and we just get a bad rap, unfortunately. But Convention of States is trying to change that perspective with the Emerging Leaders Program. So do you see the importance or the value of trying to recapture the young generation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's heartbreaking to me to see how many of my peers just don't believe in so many of the core American values, right? I mean, you can even look back to like the Declaration of Independence, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, right? It's interesting there. We focus so much on the equality portion of that, but we lose sight of the created part of that. And I think when you lose one, you ultimately lose the other. And that's why I think the Emerging Leaders Program is so important. What we do, we give training not only in the history of America, but also in the history of Western civilization and where so many of these foundational ideas that undergird our system of government come from. And they come ultimately, a lot of them come out of the Protestant Reformation and a belief in the equality of all people before God, that these rights do not come from government, that these rights are not something that government can ultimately take away, but they're something that is established much more fundamentally by God, and to which and for which people are going to be ultimately accountable. How I treat somebody else, I'm not just accountable to the government, I'm not just accountable to my peers, I'm ultimately accountable to God for how I relate to the people around me. And that has a profoundly different effect on how people view the world than simply believing that everything is about power, right? That this is about whether right? If that's the case, then you do whatever it takes. The ends justify the means. You do whatever it takes.
I think
we lose him?
lost Robert. I think we did, yeah. He was on a roll too.
He was. I was loving that every moment of it.
I know, that was fantastic. I was going to thank him for all of his time because he absolutely just shared so much wisdom with us. But before we close off, of course, we have to go to Mike Ruthenberg for the Article 5 trivia answer. So, Mike, please take it away.
Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing from Robert and Whitney and Andrew, and that you are even more informed about what we do, what we can do, and what we can't do with Convention of States Project. And if you remember early on, I was telling you I was going to give away one of these great COS hats, which of course you can get one at conventionstates.com/store if you don't win a hat, if you're not the one that guessed the answer to our trivia question, which is what are the 3 subjects or planks to the COS Article 5 application, as it's called. It's called an application, but it's really passed through the legislature as a resolution. And the 3 are term limits, fiscal restraints, and limits on federal power. There's our answer. So term limits at the federal level, it sure would be nice to get rid of some of the career politicians that are in there. I saw a great political ad by somebody talking about another politician that's been in the office for 44 years and their district is a disaster. Well, maybe we do need some term limits, and it doesn't always work at the ballot box. So that's one item that's germane to our application. The other is fiscal restraints. We have the greatest budget deficit in the history of our country this year. And you could say that it's due to the pandemic. You could make all kinds of excuses. But if we don't impose fiscal restraints on our elected officials, then they're going to continue to run away with our children's and grandchildren's future. And the third is to limit federal power. It seems like the federal government is gaining more and more power over what we do, what we can do, what we can't do, what you can do with your private property, what you can do as far as whether or not you want to bake a wedding cake for somebody. There's all kinds of issues that involve federal power. And anything that fits those topics is germane to our application or resolution. And there's the answer and explanation to our trivia question today. Thanks very much, and I will turn it back over to you, Andrew and Whitney. And
Awesome. We have
you're gonna wrap
Robert
us up.
back, so we're going to have him wrap up his thought there, and of course, thank him. Do you have anything else to add before we close off the show, Robert?
Thanks, Whitney. Sorry for dropping off on you guys.
No
No, I
problem.
think the fundamental thing is people don't appreciate the value and the importance of a person's worldview on how they vote, on how they do everything they're about in the world. Whether you believe that you are ultimately accountable to a creator shapes everything about how you interact with the world. And it's so fundamentally important that we address those fundamental questions, because everything else is downstream of that. Politics is downstream of what you believe fundamentally about the nature of the world and what you believe about how the world operates. And that's going to affect your decisions. And I think the loss of my generation has largely been a loss and a failure to train people in a proper worldview.
Wow,
Amen.
that's good. I think it's so cool that you mentioned that, because we're in the middle of Constitution Alive coaching with Rick Green, and I know that that's been a huge thing for young people. So I'm really excited to see that people are becoming more aware of what the Constitution stands for. So I'm really excited to see that. Robert, thank you so much for your time. I know that you're so busy. You have so many things going on this time of year. Not to mention you're about to get married, so that's also something that's happening amongst everything else that you have going on. So thank you so much for your time, and we hope to have you back on to answer some more questions.
Thank you so much, Whitney.
Absolutely. All right, Andrew, why don't you begin signing us off?
Yeah, let's get signed off. So I know that you are all, or not just you, but most of us are so frustrated with the DC politics. And honestly, we're sick and tired of DC politicians. And unfortunately, most Americans don't know what to do. They don't know how they can contribute to change what they're seeing come out of the DC politics. Luckily, the founders knew that we would be right where we are right now. And they knew that there would be a time where we would need to rein in the federal government. And so they gave us a solution for a time like this. And that's why Convention of States is working so hard to get an Article 5 Convention of States to come to fruition, so that we can take power from DC politicians and give them back to where it belongs, with you, the people. So if you haven't already gone and signed the petition, please go to www.conventionofstates.com, sign the petition, and join this movement. And then if you want to show up in an even bigger way, join one of your teams within your local communities within your state, and be a part of this movement, because we need you to get to a convention. And if you do join this movement, you'll be able to help make history and to change DC forever.
Yeah, who wouldn't want to be a part of that? That's kind of a huge deal, I would say. And of course, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, like us on Facebook if you have not already, Parler, subscribe to us on YouTube, all of that good stuff. And don't forget to tune in to the Battle Cry with President of Convention of States himself, Mark Meckler, which is at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. But until then, we'll see you next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time for another edition of COS Live. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.